Hello, I'm Allison Watts. I'm a school psychologist working for Jesse. I work in the Plymouth area, so this information is just gathered from working in those schools. And we're going to talk today about the specific learning disability and data collection. I put up here the definition. I just wanted you to look at that, have an idea what it is. We're not going to go over it too much detail because the focus here is more on data collection itself. The next slide, the determination of SLD eligibility. And when you're at a conference, you have this eligibility criteria sheet that you need to fill out each time. There's the academic achievement we need to focus on, also the observations, medical information, social and developmental history, and also other assessments that we're looking at. But there's been a change with the new law that was effective of 08. And that is the second bullet point, the progress and interventions. So we're going to focus more on that today. Before we used to use the discrepancy model, and we're no longer prohibited to use that. So we're looking at more how a student is progressing through interventions. The next one is how SLD is evidenced. And it can be either through insufficient progress to meet age or state approved grade level standards, or through a pattern of strengths and weaknesses in performance, achievement, or both. We can have both or either or those. Let's see. The areas of SLD, we're usually worrying about writing or reading and math, but there's also the written expression, the oral expression, and listening comprehension. And when we're doing interventions in those areas, the oral expression and listening comprehension, we're not really familiar with that, but your speech pathologist can help do those interventions, so just keep that in mind. And SLD is not the result of any of these. The visual, hearing, motor, cognitive, emotional disabilities. If a student has either of those, they most likely don't have a learning disability. The cultural factors, economic disadvantage, limited English proficiency, lack of appropriate instruction. And a lack of appropriate instruction has to do with a student who has many absences or who goes from school to school to school. We can't really say they have a learning disability if they haven't been in school for a significant amount of time to get that learning. And so our focus today is going to be on what is needed for an SLD referral. There's three key areas we're going to talk about: interventions, academic data, and also tracking progress towards those goals. I want to emphasize being specific. I don't want teachers just to give, we don't want teachers just to give us, well, our students making progress, they're below grade level. We need to have the data to support that. So scores and percentages and things of that nature. And I want to give you a little information about the difference between interventions, accommodations, and modifications. In interventions, they focus on specific deficit areas. They're identified through research-based screenings or diagnostic assessments. And that could be schools that give DIBELS assessments at the beginning of the year to do screenings to see what interventions are appropriate for certain students. They're provided in addition to the core curriculum, and it involves teaching a research-based strategy to improve proficiency in a deficit area. If you see in your handouts there, they're numbered. The first one, it's just a handout that will give you an example of accommodations and modifications and what the difference is. Accommodations are just changes in the way a student assesses or learns information. Does not change the content of instruction. And an example of that would be giving extra time on assignments or tests. And modifications are different. They're changes in the curriculum, and it does change the content of instruction. So that could be a calculator used on assignments or tests. But for more information on that, see the handout. Okay, back to our first area. The first three were the intervention, the data, and the tracking progress of interventions. So our first component is interventions. I think it's important for your schools to identify what interventions your schools have. If you see the second example in your handout, that's just something that we have developed in the Plymouth schools, well, specifically the ones that I have worked with. It gives all the programs that are at that school, what skills are being taught, also what's required for fidelity. And that's an important part of interventions as well. Matching interventions to student needs. That's important when we're thinking about interventions. If a student has a reading comprehension problem, we want to do an intervention that's focusing on reading comprehensions. We don't want to do an intervention that's focusing on fluency or phonics or reading awareness or anything like that. Conducting the intervention with fidelity, that's really important. Fidelity is just doing an intervention as it's supposed to be done. So doing it as it was designed. If we do an intervention how it's not designed, we can't really ensure that that student's making progress. And parents must be notified when they're doing interventions with the student, and that's in Article 7. It must be done. And example 3 in your handout is just a basic form that you can give to parents to let them know that your student's in an intervention. And it has areas for research-based strategies for interventions. It has a progress monitoring tool that you're going to use and how often you're going to use it. And it also has the general education services that will be provided. And that could be the accommodations or modifications that are being used. Also, I wanted to note that you might want to put, you should probably put the review date on there. You want to come back to the table and review all this information to see if the student is making progress or not. Data. This is our second component. We're looking at an SLD referral. Teams must collect baseline data. The baseline data is how the student is performing academically. It's the starting point to track progress through intervention. Baseline data is what's collected before an intervention begins, and then we can look at it as we continue on. Identify forms of data. I think that's important. You need to do that as well. I talked about identifying the interventions, but we also want to identify what forms of data your school has. So example 4 is just an example of something I use in one of my schools. On the left-hand side, it has all the types of data that are used in that school, but it also has the different columns for baseline data, so what we're looking at initially, and also has the different review columns. So what we're going to look at the same data each time to see if that student's making progress. And all of this information is reviewed at the staff meeting. How many of you have stat teams at your schools? It's quite a few. So it would probably be a good idea to come up with the interventions that your school has and the data that you have, because you can bring that information, you can bring these forms to the stat team, and when you have a student who has a certain problem, you can look at the list of things that you have. They're just easily accessible, and you can decide what plan you're going to use from that. And the types of data. We already talked about baseline data. Examples could be the grades, ISTEP scores, unit tests, STAR. I don't know, you guys might have something different. I'm just going off of what Plymouth uses. NWBA could be used, DIBELS. Informal assessments can also be used. That just meaning something that teachers are doing in the classroom. It could be site work assessments or math act assessments. You might want to do that. Formative and summative, I have that up there as well. Formative data is data you're gathering throughout an intervention, such as DIBELS or AIMSWEB, if you've ever heard of that. It's very similar to DIBELS. Summative data is what's collected at the end of an intervention or at the end of instruction, and that's ISTEP scores or NWBA scores. Now, how to collect the data. I gave you some examples of how you can collect certain things. You want to keep that in a central location so people can have access to it or add things to it as they're collecting more data. And it should include the baseline like I showed you on the example and also the progress monitoring data. And you want to document this from year to year. You can use both of those forms together. Of course, you're going to make up your own forms or however you want to do that. But if you see example 5, this form is just an example of how to document interventions. It has the interventions on the left-hand side, and it also has the grade levels. So during each grade level, you can write what intervention that student has been receiving. So when we look at this form, we can say, oh yeah, that student has been in such and such an intervention in so many years. It just gives us a good idea of how to document that. Okay, tracking progress. Schools must track progress using progress monitoring. And I'm going to talk about DIBBLES a lot because I think a lot of people are familiar with that. AIMSweb is another tool that you could use. And we want to look at 3 to 4 data points when tracking progress and making decisions. You can do this weekly or every 2 weeks. It depends on how often you want to monitor them. And that's about 6 to 8 weeks in between each review time. Because you want to have enough time to make sure that that student's making some progress or has the opportunity to. So making decisions about continuing, changing or modifying, adding new interventions, discontinuing the process if they're doing well, or considering special education after amount of times of reviewing and changing interventions. Another way you can chart progress is Intervention Central. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. There is ChartDog on that website, and you can put your data into that, and it will make out some charts for you. So that's just something that you might want to use. Now, making decisions with the progress monitoring data. I'm using a graph that's similar to a DIBBLES graph. You can see that the students making excellent progress, 3 consecutive data points are above the aim line. So here you would consider increasing the goal because they're doing well. The students making adequate progress, and Article 7 specifies adequate progress, you would see that the students' data points are aligned with the aim line. So you would continue with the interventions since they seem to be responding well to that. The next one, if they're not making adequate progress, you would see 3 consecutive data points below the aim line. And here you want to intervene. You want to change or modify the intervention. Modifying could be making a smaller group or more time added to that intervention. And then here we have a case example. And this is Sam. He's a first grader. So we're going to use all this information and put it together in an example here. And this should be done during the STAT process. So when you have trouble with a certain student, you come together and make up a plan for them. Now, during the STAT process at the beginning, you're going to talk about strengths and challenges. Sorry, I have to pull my throat. Okay. So his strengths. He's hardworking, has a pleasant attitude, he completes his homework, and has good parental support. And now the challenges, word decoding, recognizing sounds and words, addition and subtraction skills. So that's what we're going to focus on. But he also is frustrated with grade level work. Letter and number formations are an issue. The fine motor skills, and he's also inattentive during difficult tasks. So this is just a basic example of what we would do through the STAT process. Who has, now problem analysis, we're going to look at data. I want to emphasize data. That's what our whole theme is today. I'm just going to talk about 2 forms of data here. I don't want to get into everything else. Dibbles. Sam had a score of 3 on the phoneme segmentation fluency, which was below the goal of 35. And he had a score of 0 on the nonsense word fluency, which was below the goal of 50. In the math fact assessment, he had a score 25 out of 40, which was 62.5%. So now looking at that data, talking about the interventions now that he has. At the beginning of the year, screening was done with Sam, and using dibbles, he fell within that intensive level. So the teacher put him in an intervention group. She pulled him to the side with a small group and did some reading instruction, 30 minutes a day, and also did some foundations reading, which is a reading program research-based for 30 minutes a day. And here you also want to talk about the accommodations and modifications that student's receiving as well. Now, the desired outcome for Sam, we want him to improve his reading decoding skills and also his math skills. So we're going to develop some goals here. And goals are important so we can narrow the focus and we can come back to the table and look at that goal again and see if they're making progress towards that goal. So he'll show progress towards Dibble's scores, the phoneme segmentation 35 and the nonsense word of 50 by March 9th. And we put a date there so we can come back to the table and review at that time. And the measurable goal number 2, he will increase his percentage on that math fact assessment to 90%. And that's by March 9th as well. And these goals on the Dibbles, you can find them on the website if you're going to use Dibbles as your progress monitoring tool. They're just the benchmark goals for the grade levels, and that's where those goals came from. Now here's an intervention plan. So everything that we're going to do, we're going to put it in a form so we can monitor what's going on with them. So the interventions that we're using already that are in place, the small group and the foundations, so we added that. And we have the frequency and duration, so what is needed for fidelity. We also have the start date, and that started kind of towards the beginning of the year. And now we're going to add a different intervention because he's still struggling, even with those interventions that are already being done. So we have the touch phonics that's going to work on the word decoding, and we also have the fidelity, the 30 minutes a day, and the start date. And the math facts are going to work on those math fact skills, all the addition and subtraction. And we have the time there and when that's going to start. And if you see example 6 in your handout, this is a really basic form that I have here on the slide. But in your handout, this is a very comprehensive form. It has everything that we've kind of talked about in one form. You have the goals and the progress monitoring tool that you're going to use at the top, who's going to monitor, when you're going to review. You also have the interventions here, the frequency and the duration, the baseline, when it's going to start, and the reviews. So this is a good form or tool to use during your SCAP process. And on the back, it also has the strengths and other areas that you need to focus on. And I just wanted to write that here. Sam has those problems with the fine motor skills. So we're going to consult an occupational therapist to see if she can give us some ideas to work with Sam. And this is just an example of something going on during staffing. And you want to review other information as well. But here is just a simple example. And I'm not going to go through everything. That could be grades and the ISEP scores. Intervention reports are really important. Foundations is something that Plymouth uses. They have a phonics screener that they use and can be used as a progress monitoring tool. So that's important to use as well because Dibbles doesn't assess everything. So if you're doing something with reading comprehension, you want to use an intervention report of some kind. Okay, and now progress monitoring. We're going to use the Dibbles and the math facts and the flash assessments. Now we're going to follow up in about 6 to 8 weeks. So I just put a date there so you can kind of see in March. So then the next slide There's a follow-up meeting. We've been in intervention, we've been monitoring his progress, and now we're coming back to the table to review everything. We're looking at his goal, because we want to keep the focus on his problem areas. And his goal was improving his DIBELS scores in the nonsense word fluency and the phonetic segmentation. And he had a score of 24, which was an increase from 0 on the nonsense word. And he has a score of 8, which was an increase from 3 on the phonetic segmentation. And here's a DIBELS chart. It's a little different than what you've seen. You can see the goal, the bullseye mark up there is where he needs to be, and the little dots down below is where he's performing. So he's significantly below where he needs to be, not making adequate progress. Now the math goal, he was to increase his percentage on the math fact assessment to 90%. He achieved scores of 36 or higher, which was 90%. On the last 4 math fact assessments. So he has met or exceeded his goal. And again, we're looking, there was 3 to 4 data points. We want to make sure we have that before we review the information. Now with that we have just discussed, we're going to make a decision. Since we have 3 data points, we can now determine what to do next. He did not make adequate progress in DIBELS, so we're going to change that intervention to a new intervention. Touch phonics, no longer working, so we'll try a different one. Sound sensible is just something that Clement uses. We're going to continue with a small group in foundations because he seems, this is just an example. Let's pretend he likes that and he's responding well, so we're going to keep doing that. And he made excellent progress in math, so we're going to discontinue that intervention and just have parent continue that for support at home. But we will keep an eye on the assessments that mom has at home, just to monitor to make sure that he's at that level he used to be. And then we're going to again review in 6 to 8 weeks. Now here's our new intervention plan. We added a column to the right, which was the degree of success, just so we can see what decisions we made with that data that we gathered. So the small group reading instruction and the foundations, since that's doing well, he's making slow progress, we're going to continue with that. The touch phonics doesn't appear to be working. He doesn't really enjoy that. Unsuccessful, so we're going to change that to a new intervention. The math facts and assessment, math facts in a flash, we're going to discontinue that because he was successful in that area. And the sound sensible is what we added, so we just put that to the side. We're also intensifying it a bit because we're adding time. If you see in the frequency duration column, we're adding it 45 minutes. It's not just 30 anymore. And that's what's needed for fidelity. And the additional information, the OT was consulted and they're going to give some materials to the parent to work with them at home. And again, like I said before, you're going to look at other data as well. It's just a simple example. We're not going to go into detail there. And with the progress monitoring, we're going to do that weekly. And we're going to review in 6 to 8 weeks again. Now here's our other follow-up meeting. Again, we're going to look at the same thing, goal. He achieved a score of 27 on the nonsense word and 11 on the phonetic segmentation. So he is going up a little bit. And here's the DIBELS chart. You can see he is progressing somewhat, but he's also not meeting his goal. He's not making adequate progress. It's kind of flatlining there. So decision, he continues to struggle with decoding and demonstrates a weakness in reading. So at this point in time, we've tried so many interventions all year, we can consider special education at this time. And then he would go through the referral process, but I'm not going to go into detail about that. Okay, the next slide here is the response to intervention with elementary and secondary. I know this example is focusing more on elementary school, but secondary level should also be doing response to intervention because that's what the law requires. Here's some differences. Elementary school is usually focused on the basic skills. There's 1 to 2 teachers working with students. numerous scientifically based research programs at this elementary level. Early intervention is essential at this level. With that dibbles, we're going to screen for interventions. But at the secondary level, the focus is more on content. There's 5 to 7 teachers usually working with students. There's only a few research-based programs there, and there's a greater sense of urgency. Kids are falling farther behind, and the material's getting more difficult. And here we just want to address the issue of time at the secondary level. There's not really much time to do anything with students. So this just gives you an example of what you can do. Learning strategy courses for elective credit, labs, or double blocks of time you could do. You could get double dip of language arts or math. Summer school bridging programs, electives during summer school, after school programs, Saturday programs, classes within a class or more of the co-teaching kind of things. And extended graduation is the 5-year program you might want to be able to use. So example 7 in your handout kind of gives you some more information about the secondary level in our field. So in summary, we just need all our ducks in a row. We need to have those 3 components: the interventions, the data, and the progress monitoring. We need to show insufficient progress to meet grade level standards and or the pattern of strengths and weaknesses over a period of time. We need to document that through interventions, the collection of data, and also the monitoring of progress. And, since the Article 7 has changed, we have all changed with it. We need to go with that. I know we're all new to this. It's something we need to work together on, and our school psychologists are here for you to help work with you. So just contact us, and we'll be happy to help you.